Hello. Hi everybody. Maybe a few words in English this time. So we are very happy and honored tonight to welcome two great architects from Sweden. So Bolle Tham and Martin Videgård. I'm not sure if the pronunciation is correct. So that's the fifth lecture of our series of this year. So this series of lectures is called welcome to Paris-Malaquais School of Architecture, and I will hand over to Valentine Guichardas, who is an architect and teacher here, and she's gonna present our two speakers of tonight. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à toutes et tous, and welcome Bolle and Tham. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, I don't know. Thank you to be here with us today. Bolle Tham and Martin Videgård, vous êtes nés à Stockholm et vous avez fait vos études. Aujourd'hui, vous y vivez et y travaillez. Vous êtes tous deux diplômés en 1997 de l'École d'architecture de l'Institut royal de technologie. Vous créez votre agence 2 ans plus tard, après quelques incursions européennes, Paris pour Bolle et Porto pour Martin. Vous démarrez votre activité dans les années 90, en pleine crise en Suède. Vous rénovez d'abord la cuisine d'un ami, puis le bar d'un copain et quelques habitations privées. Le tournant de votre carrière arrive en 2004, lorsque vous remportez votre premier concours, le musée d'art de Kalmar. Achevé en 2008, le bâtiment porte en lui toutes les préoccupations architecturales qui ne cesseront de vous animer, une matérialité unique, une forme forte et une expression claire. Aujourd'hui reconnue internationalement, l'agence s'est imposée comme l'une des figures majeures de l'architecture contemporaine scandinave. Votre travail se distingue par une approche à la fois pragmatique et expérimentale, conceptuellement exigeante, où chaque projet est étroitement lié à un contexte singulier. L'Europe est faite de sa diversité, des territoires anthropisés ou non, des cultures qui l'habitent, de la singularité des pratiques. Aujourd'hui plus que jamais, dans le trouble précipité par les expressions tyranniques et le nouveau régime climatique, cette pluralité doit être affirmée comme une richesse partagée, comme solidarité potentielle. L'architecture en tant que reflet direct de la société doit être au cœur de ces questions, et quel autre lieu plus indiqué qu'une école d'architecture pour porter cette réflexion. Bolle and Martin, I would like to thank you again for your presence here in Paris-Malaquais.
Thank you. Do we need to take it like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay, I'll do like this.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It's great to be back in Paris. We thought, since it's a school, that we will start from the beginning and then focus a little bit on the way we see context and how we work with what we call the universal aspects of architecture.
So our ambition with this give you an insight of how we think, and our take on architecture is not the same for every practice. And we have sort of developed over the years method how to deal with different tasks that we'll come up with. Could be anything from projects locally in Sweden, but also abroad. And we're located in Stockholm, and the red dot over there is our office. And Stockholm is special in that sense. It's all built up on several islands. So we have 30,000 islands sort of define Stockholm and its archipelago. And we feel that where you're from and where you're raised and where you have studied and worked, I think that influences the way you deal with architecture. So the upbringing and the historical perspective and context is important. The Swedish society itself is also kind of special, or the Nordic countries are special in that sense.
And the history of Sweden, I mean, it used to be a very, very poor country, as you might know, until the 20th century. And on these 30,000 islands around Stockholm, there were mostly fishermen and farmers. And today, of course, those islands are used more for leisure and pleasure. But many of our early projects started there with small cottages and small interventions. And this sort of close contact to nature and the view on resources that comes with that has been at least one part of where we started. So to use quite as little resources as possible to create as much as possible, basically. This leads us into the discussion of contexts, and it's in plural, as you can see. And this is something that we find inspiring in every project. If you look close enough on the contexts, on the situation, on the history, and perhaps the local know-how and resources, there are very often something to find in there to guide and inspire the project. So that's something that it's very hard to avoid for an architect, and you could also argue, of course, that the context and the relation to context is what makes a project anchored and perhaps work for real in reality.
So if we stay at the concept of context, we try to interpretate it as rich as possible, in the sense that it could mean several different things. And from the Swedish perspective, this vernacular architecture is one way to look at it. That's our long time history and heritage. And if you look on a building like this, which is several hundred years old, still standing there, and it's a pragmatic building in the sense that the location of the building is the driest spot of the land. The material is from the forest, of course, so, and the length of each log is as long as 2 men can carry. All the corners are easily or roughly cut out and joined together, so the whole building is all holding together through gravity, not any screws or nails and stuff. And so this sort of pragmatic attitude that vernacular architecture has, it's an architecture without architects, of course, but it's sort of inspiring because it finds its fastest way to the goals. And being efficient nowadays is also a crucial thing for us as architects. So you can learn a lot from the pragmatism, the vernacular architecture. So we often go back into history, not only by looking at the different styles and aesthetics, but rather than how to assemble a building, the logical, the tectonics behind it. Kind of interesting to study in detail.
And yeah, you could also add that, of course, when you see this building, it's quite beautiful. And so the persons that made it happen, they also obviously took joy somehow in making a composition out of what was necessary into creating something that is also beyond just function.
Another aspect of the vernacular architecture is that it's kind of a humble sense that if you remove it or move it, then you don't leave any traces at all. It's just placed on a couple of rocks. So it's very, very environmental friendly in that sense. Well, the next topic is the universal, which is something that all architects work with. It's our tools, so to say. I think you're all familiar with those things like mass and void, scale, proportion, light and shadow, spatial order, movement, structure. That is the core and the tools that we architects work with, and we as humans experience those the exact same way, with slight interpretations to cultural changes. But but more or less we can sense if a room is dark or bright, the ceiling is high or low, and so forth. And those tools are something that we always work with and try to define on our projects and have a clear relationship to, as well as the context. So these are the two things that we have as our toolbox within the office. Also a way of communicating architecture within the office, so everybody knows what we're striving for and which direction to go.
Yeah, and so if you say that context is about anchoring a building or a project to its place and to its time, perhaps, these universal, or we used to call it the operative elements of architecture, because it's what affects you as a human and as an animal, basically, the feelings architecture can produce. And as an example, we often use this image that is interesting because it's about, on one hand, pure construction. It's a way of transporting a car up to the roof to test it. So, I mean, a very basic program, very straightforward solution. The dimension of the building is, of course, exactly the turning radius of that car. So the architect and the engineer in this case had a very clear program, but again, obviously took joy in producing something that is beyond just function, and the proportions and the way that construction and architectural space is combined in this project is of course very, very strong.
And well, we haven't taught that much, but we were guest professors in Germany for a while. And this is a way of sort of talking around architecture and teaching architecture in dissecting projects like this, and trying to understand what makes the difference, what creates the space, and how it's done, and so forth, and beyond that, the meaning behind it, and how it sort of relates to society and the time period where it's conceived. So I think these two things, the context and the universal, are crucial for our work. Well, coming back to that, we have a couple of projects that hopefully illustrates our thoughts behind our way of working. And the first one is a small hotel, actually the smallest project we've ever done, but perhaps one of the most seen projects. It's a tree hotel up in the very north of Sweden, close to the polar circle. And we got an invitation from a client who had a small hostel over there and wanted to expand with this crazy idea of expanding with tree houses. And we went up there, and it's super remote. It's very beautiful. It's a pristine nature. You go there to experience the uncultivated nature. And this sort of strange paradox, because you can find those beautiful places which is untouched, where it's quite remote. The climate could be really harsh. It could be the desert, could be the ocean, could be the very north. People have decided not to stay there for quite, or build a city over here. But people go there to experience it. It's sort of a primal move in that sense. And to be able to deal with that, that's the paradox. We bring our most advanced gears just to cope and survive. So we have Gore-Tex and Kevlar and cell phones and everything just to survive, and being able to approach this urge of feeling the natural or the wild and the untouched and pristine, which is kind of strange. Super high tech on one end, and the natural on the other end.
Yeah, and so we wanted to use that paradox in our project, and so our first proposal, this is a sketch, was this abstract box that is of course very alien in a way to its surroundings, but at the same time it uses the high-tech technology that is inserted into nature to also blend in, to make a camouflage kind of atmosphere, and which goes back of course to the idea of a tree house where where you can hide and you can sort of be there and observe but not be seen. And this little town, only a couple of hundred inhabitants, together managed to build this entire project. There were 5 architects invited originally to make one house each, and the mirror cube is our project. And together with 2 engineers, we calculated both the structure of the building itself and of the tree, so that we would be sure that the tree could stand the load, etc. And then basically with a very light aluminium structure covered with plywood on the inside and mirror, or what do you say, highly reflective glasses like spy glass on the outside. Created this miniature house in the tree.
So this sort of high-tech project of ours was exciting. It took a while just to figure out how we should do this, because it has not really been done before. But we constructed it in 2 parts. We didn't perforate the tree. It just there are just clamps holding it together close to the tree trunk. And well, here you have image of one part is lifted up, and the next one is where it's mounted. And you have, in the beginning we had just a like a, what do you say, rope ladder, but it was too inconvenient. So we ended up with this rope bridge instead. And it functions in a way that it's quite convenient and nice to be there, compared to having been hiking for 2 weeks and living in a tent. This is sort of a luxury coming here. And it holds this small double bed, this double height living room, a small bathroom, and a sunken terrace. So it has sort of classical architecture features that everybody knows about. But on the other hand, from the outside, it just disappears. From one angle, it just blends into nature, and it follows the ambition of not cultivating this land. It should be as abstract and untouched as from the very beginning, and the reason why you go there. So and from other angles, it sort of stands out, and during the night, the spyglass becomes reflective and transparent, so you see the light coming through. So it sort of changes over the day quite a lot. And so on one hand, it's a very simple idea, but still it's sort of anchored in our way of dealing with and coming from the analysis of this specific context, and trying to develop something that is, let's say, high-tech or abstract. It was a funny small project that we did, and it was like 15 years ago, so it has been standing there for quite some time now.
And a completely different project in the south of Sweden. That was far north at the polar circle. This one is in the south, and here the client wanted a vacation home, but a rather large program. And the site, when we arrived there, was really beautiful, a bit of a pocket in the agricultural landscape. And as it happened, there were only 3 parcels, and this parcel had the character of an abandoned botanic garden or something, beautiful flowering bushes and a small creek passing through the site diagonally. So here we started looking at 2 things. First of all, in the south of Sweden, as opposed to the north, this is where the tradition of using bricks and stonework is much more present. And the site happened also to be rather close to this church by Leverance, one of the masters, and of course a reference in this area and for everyone working in Sweden. It was also close to an old barn that was going down, so we realized there could be a possibility to reuse the brick from this barn. So these were a couple of cues for us. The other fact was that this beautiful place with all the trees and flowering bushes, we were contemplating how could we distribute the program across the site and keeping as much as possible of the existing qualities. So a bit in connection with the idea of a brick stone, each room was defined as a separate unit and then combined across the site. So it's on the one hand completely orthogonal, but it's also very organic in the way that you can move these different units to work with the site.
So this sort of Lego topology that we dissected the program into one volume, one function. We could so squeeze it in this beautiful botanic garden, and it creates those small pocket outdoors, the pocket, would say, courtyards, and the way you move through the system is not perpendicular. You move like you walk in a forest. It's like you're lingering diagonally, and you don't follow a straight line necessarily. And you experience, it's really hard to understand how it sort of continues when you move from one volume to another the first time you go there. And so it has sort of an organic quality to it.
And you could say that the inner logic in this house is not about being super efficient, because it's a vacation home, so everything doesn't have to be exactly next to the other program or function. So that's also one way of looking at the universal or the context, that a permanent home or an office or a vacation home differs. I mean, and what you're looking for are different kinds of environments and experiences. And these drawings just show the fact that in this case, it's not about the metric system, it's about the brick. So the brick was the unit that we worked with and sort of calibrated the size of each space from.
And coming back to the idea about sustainability, well, the form factor of this building is not the best, of course, but on the other hand, it's made by reused bricks, and it's a solid and well-proved construction method. So, and we often say that the oldest buildings still in function are the most sustainable one. And that is also a way of dealing with sustainability issues. It's not only about energy consumption and be as efficient with that as possible, because it needs quite a lot of technical stuff. You can do something that's kind of analog with solid materials, and it will stand there for hundreds of years. And in the long run, if you have this sort of life cycle perspective on things, it probably equals the sort of more contemporary, not way of dealing with it, with new techniques and stuff, because all the technical stuff has to be removed in 20-25 years and so. And that's something to think about, because that's one of our biggest issues, I think, to cope with the sustainability needs that we have to deal with.
And so as you can see, it's all in brick, and that was also something to solve the water. The creek floods every now and then, so we knew that we needed a construction that could stand a lot of water and different seasons. And then on the inside, we felt that each of these rooms could have their own relation to the outside landscape. So this is why each room has these vaulted ceilings, and they have different directions, so that when you enter one space, it will probably sort of guide you and the direction of that space in a different directions. So there's a lot of things going on the inside. The spaces are also different floor to ceiling height. So there are more intimate spaces and more large spaces, more perhaps grand for social action.
And even though the windows aren't that big, there are several windows, and each volume has at least 3 openings. So you can really explore and get a sense of this botanic garden from the inside, as well as when you move out, you have a lot of small corners and pockets to explore. So it's sort of rich in that sense. And the overall impression is that it looks quite much smaller compared to what it is in actual square meters, since you can only experience just a few of those volumes.
Right. So this is also an old project. I think you mentioned it in the introduction. It's the first public work that we realized, and it was an open competition with about, at that time, 300 proposals from 16 countries or something. And we were very fortunate to win and to also actually build it, because at that time, in beginning of 2004, most competitions in Sweden that were held didn't result in a building. It was just a competition, and then something happened. And so it was a big thing for us, and of course opened up the possibility to do more public work. The context here is very interesting. Kalmar is one of the most important towns in southeast Sweden, and it was part of the protection, sort of the in the Renaissance. So in the 15th and 16th centuries, this was part of the Swedish defense line towards Denmark that had part of southern Sweden at that time. And as you can see from these images, the church from the same architect that did the Royal Castle in Stockholm, and this is one of the most important Renaissance castles in Sweden. And in between those, there's the city park, and that's the site for the competition. And the city park in Kalmar, it's like the living room of everyone that lives in Kalmar. So you don't build in that city park without them noticing. And there was this restaurant pavilion that, also talking about time passes, it's quite interesting. This was built in the end of the 30s. Everybody wanted to tear it down directly because they thought it was ugly and modern. And now when they do the competition in 2004, everybody said that you can't build here because the pavilion is so beautiful, you have to keep it. And the program stated that that would be the restaurant for the new museum. So our task was to build a museum next to the restaurant. And these images show the layout of the park that guided us in how we kind of looked at, let's say, the movement and the possibilities to insert a place, an additional place in this park. And part of that was that Kalmar is a very flat town. So it's not like Stockholm, where we have some mountains and some cliffs where you can sort of climb and look back at the city. In Kalmar, it's all flat. So you never get this perspective back on the city. And we thought that if we concentrated the program, as these images show, rather than making a stretched out 1 or 2 level building, we could create an additional promenade that would be vertical rather than horizontal. So those were the key points of how we structured the project.
And since this was an open competition with several hundred proposals, I think the key for us winning this was this sort of bold stance in just stacking every program on top of each other, and it functioned. It sort of follows the program quite well, and it created this topography in this flat city. Didn't interfere with this sort of narrow park, or take away, or created an inside and outside, and we had this very, very clear and basic idea that each floor should offer something different. So from the ground level, we had the children's atelier, where they could move out from the inside to the outside in the park. 1 story up, you have the contemporary exhibitions with a view towards the sea. And then we have a mezzanine level with a library and video art. And at the very top, we have this northern light coming in, and where you can show the collection. Museum itself is quite small. It's just a couple of 1,000 square meters. But all in all, it's sort of a vertical promenade, and you experience quite a lot within those few square meters. And when we handed in the proposal, we opted for in situ cast concrete exposed to the inside, which was load bearing, and we clad it in plywood, and then a few openings, creating a relationship to the park. And during the process, they tried to make it cheaper in one way, and we had a lot of detours, but we always came back to this initial proposal. So it was actually built exactly like we proposed it. So not only by through construction, but also spatial-wise and in the minor details, it was really there. And that was probably due to our experience of working with private houses with a low budget, and we have sort of developed ideas of what's costly and not, and how to deal with a bag of money as efficient as possible.
And so the end result was, well, it was super close to the competition proposal, as Martin said. The 4 years it took from the competition to the final result was, this is what we did during those years. I mean, everything that you need but that you don't want to see. Takes a lot of time to manage that, as everyone knows in this room probably. And these are some images from the interior. This is the top floor with the collections. There were several details in our solution that slightly went away from what the program stated. This was one moment that this space was actually stated as it should be completely closed with no daylight. But we said that, well, contemporary art is not only sensible things, sensible for light. So being close to the water in this park, it makes sense to have the possibility at least to use this window. But of course you can close it if you don't need it. Coming back to the idea of the exterior, our observation that guided us towards this kind of materiality was that the light modernistic pavilion from the 30s, sitting among the dark trees, could sort of still be the only modernistic pavilion, very light and open, whereas the museum sat as a part of the backdrop behind, together with the trees. And as you know, when these images are without the leaves on, but when it's on, it's like a dark mass, basically, sort of surrounding that modernistic pavilion. So all in all, it sort of stands out, of course, but at the same time, it sort of works very closely to the existing context.
So more or less directly after we finished this, the Kalmar Art Museum, we got an invitation to do a proposal for the School of Architecture in Stockholm, the actual school that we have went to ourselves. They plan to move to the other side of the main street, be a part of the KTH campus. We were kind of isolated, and now they wanted to integrate it into this large technical campus. And the site is, as you can see, quite narrow, the program quite big, and we had the possibility to integrate it within the long building within the parcel. But we felt that it was important to create something that was freestanding, creating a sort of identity for the architects within this huge campus. That's one of the qualities of campuses, that you have several different buildings, they represent different stuff, and you move from one building to another and so forth, kind of similar to here perhaps. So we looked at this fairly homogeneous school and campus that was built of masonry, foremost, delicately crafted, and the craftsmanship was one of the sort of qualities, and it was really present. But we felt that building in brick in this case was not really possible. It was too expensive. We had to find a smarter way or quicker way to deal with it. So we ended up in Corten steel instead, which is fairly close to the brick when it comes to sort of heaviness and material presence, and the color is also quite close to the bricks.
And so the material and the, let's say, the bricks and the Corten steel was one part of the relation to the site. The other was, of course, the narrow courtyard and how to insert this program into that courtyard. And from different studies we realized that the curved building looked shorter and sort of smaller when you were standing in the narrow alleyways around it. So that's why we started looking at a curve as a start for the building. And then, as you can see from this model, that became sort of the inner logic of this building, that connected both to the idea of a campus as something that you move across and even through buildings to the next building. And this is also what you could do in here. And we also wanted the whole building to be accessible for everyone. So regardless of whether you're a student or you're a professor or researcher, you should be able to sort of move through the building and reach the top. And we proposed the two roof terraces so that you could access the top of the building, but also look back at Stockholm. It happens that this sits on the side so that you can look back at the city from the top of the building.
And working with those concave and convex curves that creates this movement, it also creates a building that is unseen in a way. It's not that orthogonal, rational building. It's more like a consequence of a very specific situation. And as being a school of architecture, it's also a reference point for all the students. Whether or not you want to, you refer to the school that you go to every day, and you create a relationship. You either hate it or love it, but you cannot avoid that sort of. So it's something to learn from. We felt, and when you first enter the building, you can feel like it's more like a maze. It's kind of unorthodox and hard to find your way through, but all the architect students are going to stay here for 5 years, so eventually they will find a way. And if you look close enough, it's not that tricky actually. Especially the ateliers, as you see here, it's just one continuous room with two cores. We have a shortcut in between the cores. So it's you can just walk your way through, and then you come back to the place where you start. So it's an sort of odd building in that sense, being an architecture school, but that was how we could solve the program in this super narrow space.
And as I mentioned, from the upper floors, you have this relation back to the city. And from this point, actually, the church that you see, that's the location of the old School of Architecture. So there's a connection there too. And of course, then when the students started working here, things happen. It becomes messy in a nice way. And the cores have their own windows so that you can work in there but still have sort of daylight, but also, of course, a social function connection. And the couple of large spaces that are communal on the top of the building that create these almost like signal eyes looking out. And yeah, well, the other thing you can say about this project, the Kalmar Museum took 4 years from competition to completion, and this building took 8 years, I think. And now we are in the office, we are working on things that are already 12 years in the process, and we are just starting construction. That's, I don't know why that is, but it seems like the tendency is that things goes, it moves slower and slower. It's also an interesting factor for architects to consider, because what you propose day one could, of course, be obsolete 10 years later.
And but it goes for this project as well. We won the competition in 2015, and it's now they have broken ground, and they are starting to build the project, and it will be finished within 3 years or so. And that is similar in programming as the School of Architecture is the Faculty for Fine Arts, Applied and Performing Arts in Gothenburg, in the southwest of Sweden. And this project is located in the very center of Gothenburg, at Götaplatsen is called, which is the main square, or more formal square, surrounded by cultural buildings. And the heritage is kind of long and rich. In the center you can see the art museum over here. And this image is actually taken more or less 100 years ago. It was an exhibition where a lot of temporary buildings were built. They were torn down a couple of years later, but it sort of highlighted the progression of Sweden, and the technical and the architecture and the cultural sort of leaps that we have taken over the years. But the remaining building of this exhibition was the art museum, as you can see here, dominant building at the very end of this boulevard. It defines this square, Götaplatsen. Alongside you have the theater and what's it called?
It's a concert hall, right?
The concert hall.
And I mean, all these buildings were built during a period of neoclassicism and early modernism. So the atmosphere in this cultural plaza is kind of coherent and a very strong point and part of Gothenburg's DNA, you could say. And if can we point in this? Yeah. So the site was actually just next to it here. So you can see there's an existing car park and an old, smaller school, and then a special building for dance and music. And so the brief was to assemble a series of different artistic institutions into one communal building and block. And we did, it was kind of an open question. We did a research on, how and where to place these buildings, and how to best use the land, basically, and create as much quality as possible. And I think the key to our project was that the relation to this situation that we just described with the museum, concert hall, and the city theater, we had what we call the cube here, that will be sort of the second row onto this plaza. So it sort of takes part of that ensemble, but it's not sort of standing on the front row. And then this building is also new, and we proposed that it would sort of support existing street on the other side. So this project really has a couple of very different situations that it relates to. And as you will see, it also has different sort of material qualities to it. And on this image to the left, you can just sort of see part of the new building. And then when you move further into the square, it stands there. And it's, of course, an amazing place for the students, because these institutions that surrounds the square are the institutions where they, in the future, will exhibit their work, whether it's paintings or music or dance or theater, etc.
So if the squarish building follows the logic of the institutional buildings around the square, sort of similar in color, have the same sort of heaviness and thickness to it. The facade is made up more like a Stonehenge principle. It's stacked volumes on top of each other, precast concrete elements with just gaps in between.
you could say also that one sort of fundamental idea from our side was that a school like this, the curriculum changes all the time, and the way you use different spaces changes. So our idea was a bit inspired by what we call, urban industrial buildings. We have a few of those in Stockholm. You probably have them here as well, where like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you would have like a shoemaker, and then you would have a carpenter, and then you have a print shop, and they would all be in the same building on different levels, and basically just a very generic or in a positive way structure where you could use the spaces in many different ways. So that's also sort of a starting point for our way of combining these different institutions into one building.
So if this building sort of fills the gap along the square and relates those buildings, the more narrow building defines the street and being a part of that. So it's like two separate buildings dealing with two different urban situations. And as Bolle said, we were really interested in trying to do something that is generic in that sense, that it could be functional in many different ways. So we wanted to do something that could adapt over the years for different curriculums, for different functions. So it's a series of rooms in different sizes with more or less the same initial functions that could change over the time and be adapted over the time. So as you can see, the squarish volume has this core in the middle, which is a huge skylight, gives light to the inner part. Otherwise, it's just surrounded with larger rooms, atelier spaces.
And then we'll just flip through this because to show you that it's a rather complex program. It goes from this, which is actually a subway station, which sits in one corner of the project, and then there are workshops and there are different kinds of acoustic and music spaces and performance spaces, dance spaces, and recording studios. As you can imagine, some of these spaces are very specific, and so it's been let's say a lot of work to sort of maintain as much of the general qualities as possible. Regarding the use of material on the interior, we thought that what the students bring will of course be the most important in this building. So except for these kind of spaces where you need acoustic installations, it's a very straightforward and direct solution where you basically see the structure and exposed installations, as you can see. Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see, because these three schools or three institutions that it used to be will in 2 years, about 2 years, they will move into the same building, and we'll see how that goes. It's going to be a completely new environment for them, and also, of course, the way that they can work together. At the moment, it's on site, but still working from the ground up.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking for at least 45 minutes, so maybe we should stop there. We have several other projects to show you, but I think we will have a discussion later on. So what do you say? Should we stop here and continue with the discussion?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Feel free to.
Okay. You have some question or yes?
Hello. Okay, thank you one more time for the great presentation. So the first time I'm really get into a work process of a Scandinavian architecture firm. And today I got two questions, especially about the project of the KTH School of Architecture. The first question is, as I was seeing the floor plan, I was having a reflection because we come from Germany, and we have the thinking of everything got to be in a grid, everything got to be in a box. And as I saw the really free, really vibrant floor plan of the school, was that also a reflection of the concept in the buildings in, let's say, in Swedish culture? And the second question was, as we were seeing the material of the facade, I think that was something with the metal, and with the time it's getting red. So would you talk more about the philosophy behind the selection of the material in this concept, in this project? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and answer your question. Regarding the unusual plan layout of the School of Architecture, the observation that I mentioned before, that the curve helped the building to look smaller than it actually is when you move around it, that was sort of the start. And then the fact that we had to use the whole perimeter of the building on the atelier floors to accommodate for as many students as possible, also sort of left us with a core that had a rather unusual shape, like a rounded triangle or something like that. So I think in part from necessity, but also in part because we realized that this was an opportunity to create a different kind of order and logic in that building than what you mentioned would be like an expected institutional building with straight corridors and spaces next to each other. So in this case, with this kind of program, it turned out to be very efficient. We could make use of the space very efficiently with this kind of strange shapes. In another situation, it could be the opposite, of course, that the most straightforward and efficient solution would be to use an orthogonal order, etc. And so it's not about that we prefer the one to the other, but more that we realized that in this situation, this actually helped us to work this way. I'm not sure I really got the question about the material and the facade.
Hello. Okay, because we saw in the Scandinavian build culture, the build culture, you guys using a lot of bricks, and in that buildings, we were sawing another type of material.
So you mean, so why is it steel rather than brick?
Yeah, and why is this kind of thinking of going out of the traditional buildings when you were saying the context of philosophy of the firm was kind of like inherent?
Yeah. So I think I think you could imagine that building, the new building, was blue or orange or something like that. Then it would be very different from the sort of surrounding atmosphere and sort of material quality of the brick buildings. The corten steel that is corroded has a lot of materiality, even though it's just a thin steel sheet. So we thought it was a material that was not sort of competing with the existing buildings, but still relating to them in a very direct way. So very close to home, but not in the exact same material.
Okay, thank you.
Vous n'avez pas de questions? Vous êtes un peu timide. Ok, moi j'en ai. Okay, it's a big question, I think. How to engage the projects in the new climate regime? What for you the definition of sustainability?
Our definition of sustainability. We were talking about that briefly when we were talking about the Creek House. That
I'm talking about all your architecture, but
Yeah.
maybe the question is, I don't know. It's a big question. It's a large question, but I'm curious to have your vision, your Swedish vision of this question.
Well, there are several aspects on that topic, and one is that the Swedish and the Nordic countries have, or perhaps in Germany as well, have a strict regulation when it comes to sustainability issues and energy consumption foremost. And that sort of triggers architecture to go in a certain way. We have to reuse energy, you have to work with a certain kind of materials, you have to invent energy from solar panels or whatever, just to reduce the energy consumption as much as possible. And that goes also along with a lot of high-tech solutions, a lot of machinery that you have to include in the construction just to make it work and apply to the regulations. And we find that in one way problematic in that sense that all the technical stuff has to be changed over the years. Quite the timeline of a XTF system is like 20-25 years, and then you have to take it away. And it's a lot of energy in just producing those machines and take them away and install a new one. So I think it's important to have this sort of life cycle perspective on things when it comes to sustainability, and especially when it comes to architecture. And the best architecture is built with materiality quality, not only for the eye and for the time being, but also for the long-term perspective. It lasts for a long time, and it's probably more beautiful. It's like Vitruvius said. It's like the building should be adaptable and possible to use in many ways. It should be beautiful, and it should be built in a very sturdy, rational way. And that is probably the best way to handle the sustainable issue, I think. It should not necessarily interfere with technical improvements and so forth, but I can see a conflict between the well-crafted buildings with materiality that we know will last for a very long time, that of course cost a lot, but and the short-term perspective in earning quick money in architecture, which we're a part of, the sort of building industry. So it's a contradictory issue that everybody talks about, but not that much in the long-term perspective, I think.
Yeah, I could just add that to be able to produce real sustainable buildings, we also need to negotiate, I think, the kind of standards we demand from a building. And for example, a very simple building that is 100 or 200 years old is probably a little bit too hot in the summer and a little bit too cold in winter, and which means that in summer you need to take off your sweater, and in the winter you need to put it on. And perhaps you can't sit 10 centimeters from the facade in winter because it's going to be too cold, and etc. And now in Sweden, and I guess in the rest of Europe as well, we have standards that states that the temperature inside a newly produced housing unit needs to meet demands that makes it possible basically to sit in your t-shirt close to the wall any time of the year. And we spend a lot of energy and money to achieve that. And does that make sense? Perhaps not. Perhaps so. In that sense, you could argue that a more basic building, I mean, instead of saying less performing, more basic, could be perhaps a better solution if we want to, use as little material and energy and, create buildings that just stands there and are easy to maintain, as Martin mentioned, rather than having very sophisticated systems that needs to be changed every 10th or 25th year. So it's complex, and we don't speak so much about these things when we talk about, we do a short talk like this, basically because it's just one part of many, many things that you always need to handle as an architect. And we try and focus on the sort of the core, so the shaping of space and the design of buildings from an architectural point of view, rather than from energy or technical inventions or politics or whatever you could sort of load architectural projects with.
Thank you for the answer. So another thing, your architecture presents a great diversity of expressions, scales, programs, and constant remains in the attention of the plan work, and I'm curious to have your vision on the relationship between structure and space, and what is your obsessions with the plan?
I think we're not really taught in a systematic scheme in that sense. We were taught in the 90s. There were a lot of the constructivist theories and a lot of expressions beyond the grid, so to say. My father, who was an architect, and your father as well, they were taught in the grid system. Like, you start with a squarish perpendicular paper, and then you start to solve the program. But I think we came in from another way. Of course, the sort of rationality in the building is important. We know that sort of pragmatism, but the possible way of dealing with expressions or to enhance something could go beyond the grid, so to say. So I think we start with a hierarchy rather than a building system, and from there we sort of develop our architecture. So it's more idea-driven, ideas regarding space and emotions and how you can experience something, rather than engineering, mathematical point of view. So that's one way of, I think, we approach the plan. But on the other hand, we have to squeeze it into some sort of rationality due to economics and many different reasons. So, but we never start with that, really.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I see a parallel, or maybe with the Cannes architecture, because I think your plans are I think like rooms. Your spaces are rooms, and rooms more than plan. I don't know. Free plan. Yes.
Well, the section is as important as the plan, so to say, and if you have a section on a plan, then you have a space. So I think it's perhaps a way of working also. Before we worked a lot with physical models. A physical model could catch the light exactly the same way as a building one-to-one does. So we studied our proposals in 3D quite a lot, and later on we are working closely with our 3D makers within the office. So we have a SketchUp model that we update all the time and try out different ways. And now we have AI, which is sort of fantastic in that sense. You can create a reality super quick, but you don't really work with images, but rather with space, as you say. So being able to walk through an imaginary building, either with Google's or in the computer, it's amazing. So we try to use the technical sort of advances as much as we can.
I was thinking about, because we have a few things that we didn't show you, but the interesting thing with the plan is, of course, that it can look very clear, and then when you're in the space, it's more like a labyrinth. And this is something that we have observed in the famous La Rotonda by Palladio, for instance, where the fact that it's symmetrical, if you imagine that you move through these spaces, and especially if you're on a party, you probably lose yourself. You can't remember. I mean, unless the rooms are very clearly separated in color or something. And we had this idea that it's rather the landscape, it's rather the view outside that makes sense to a plan like this. And we used that in a very small project, which is a very small summer cottage. So the most important feature of this project is not what's inside, really, but it's the fact that you are inside and you relate to the landscape outside, and the landscape is what sort of guides you and tells you, in which part of this space am I. So the plan is interesting in that case, because it can really be deceptive in a way, that you imagine something to be very clear just because it's repetitive or it's symmetrical, but in fact, when you experience the spaces, it's the opposite.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Yes, thank you for this presentation. I was thinking that you started the presentation with a small cabin, vernacular building, and I have the feeling that in your work you really have this attention to small scale and to minimizing the scale of your buildings, which is very interesting, I think. Also, in relationship with what you just said, that your buildings can be deceptive. You are playing with the scale and playing with the paths and the perception of the people inside your buildings. I have this feeling about your buildings. Would you say that this is something that you are working with, these scales, these perceptions, and maybe also how does it relate with the different scales of your buildings and the different programs of your buildings? Because you have very small realizations, and also some of them are very huge. So what is the relationship with these feelings of perception of the scale and the paths and the perception of your buildings with the scale of the building, the real scale of the building?
Yeah, I think scale is closely linked to proportion, and proportion is scaleless in that sense. It sort of creates a relationship between two things or several things. And when I studied at an art school, one of my teachers said that what's the difference between a miniature the full-scale sculpture. And he said that a miniature is something that you can intellectually understand. It's small in the sense that you can feel that you can hold it in your hand, or you can just look at it and see how it looks from behind. But the full-scale sculpture is something that you relate to with your body. You have to move around, you have to walk to experience it. And I think that goes for architecture as well. Details are something that's something, in a way, could be delicate and beautiful, but the full-scale architecture is something that you have to move around and experience with your body, so to say. I'm not sure if that was an answer to your question, but we, since we have several assignments, big as well as small, and we feel that the private houses are like a test bed for us to try out new stuff, and the result from start to end is kind of quick compared to the bigger projects that could take like 10 years. So having that sort of dynamic within our work is kind of nice. It sort of gives us different opportunities to work on different things, so to say. And that's part of the scale thing. But yeah, you were thinking?
Yeah, I could perhaps just add that if, as an architect, you're given the task to design a building, there will be a lot of energy and cost going into that. And so one way to look at it is, of course, that if you can offer some more than just the pure function, which could then be, of course, something that is surprising or something that provokes a sensation when you move through the spaces in a positive way, that is always a good idea. So I think if you look at any project, you could imagine to just solve it as quick as you can, or to really look at it closely and see what more can we offer if we what we need, and then what can we offer beyond that, let's say, as an architect. And the universal qualities is something that we come back to in that sense, that to make a difference, you need to be clear. I think you said that yourself, that the difference in floor to ceiling height, or the difference between a dark room and a bright room, etc., needs to be clear enough so that it actually makes a difference.
I think, bon, c'était votre dernière chance, c'est bon? Ok. Donc, on va terminer cette conférence. Thank you very much, Bolle and Martin, for this conference.
Thank you.